Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Wednesday edition of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and I'm joined today by a special guest, Mr. John Endres, CEO of, oh, not CEO, sorry, COO, I think. No, sorry, Chief of Staff. There we go, of the IRR. John, how are you today?
Doing very well. It's a steamy and muggy afternoon, so maybe we'll get a few thunder showers later in the day.
It is indeed. I saw the weather app, which I call the lying weather app because I don't really believe it, predicted a lot of rain for Joburg. And of course, I'm also joined once again by Mr. Hermann Pretorius, who is still of bad internet, so we do apologize if he disappears or something again. He's also not visible on our camera. As some of you may know, we are now on YouTube. You can find us at Daily Friend if you search Daily Friend on YouTube. Hermann, how are you?
Well, I'm good, thanks. But I think it would be it's no great loss to our audience, and listeners, and viewers if my face is more obscured than it otherwise would be. I think we should do some testing as to the viewing numbers when my face is visible versus not visible. I think we'll find non-visibility suits me.
I don't know, Herman. Maybe you sell yourself too short. I'm sure you're going to develop a huge fan base out there. Anyway, let's start off with a story about the South African Social Security Agency, more commonly referred to as SASSA. Now, SASSA is a very important thing for the lives of many very poor South Africans, as it is responsible for sending out grants, pensions, all that kind of thing. And there have been some troubles with SASSA over the past couple of weeks. There was a story a while ago that SASSA did not have money to pay certain grants, and therefore was not going to be able to. I think it said it was going to cancel 200,000 disability grants. However, SASSA then released a statement saying, no, it's not that we have to cancel these. These are normal. These are temporary disability grants that had their timeline extended. So they were supposed to be renewed in, I think, February or March of last year. But that deadline was extended until December of this year, of last year, to make sure that people could get away from sort of COVID and didn't all have to rush at the beginning of lockdown. The result has been that people now have to reapply for 200,000, what it turned out to be temporary disability grants that have now all expired. The SASSA says they will need an additional 1.2 billion rand in government funding in order to be able to just keep them going without people having to reapply. They say that these disability grants are awarded for medical conditions which impact negatively on the applicant's ability to work for a period longer than a year. Temporary grants are given for a period of 6 to 12 months and renewed if needed once this lapses. One of the provinces really badly hit by this has been the Western Cape, where 53,000 disability grants lapsed in January. And people have had to now queue for hours. There was a piece on Ground Up, which is one of these smaller news sites, who interviewed some people who had been waiting in queues to renew their grants. There was an older lady who suffers from epilepsy, who spent 2 nights sleeping outside of a SASSA office. She said, "I wish our government could see this. Is there nothing they can do to prevent us from coming here while there's a second wave of COVID-19 is killing people every day?" Herman, this is not great, and I think it speaks a lot to the sort of desperation that's going on in the country. What should we take away from this, and what should we do to resolve this problem?
Well, I mean, this really is a massive problem. The whole social grant system, in my view, really has snowballed into such a conglomeration of failures and almost life-threatening political failures that it's tough to start disentangling a mess like this, because in the first place, I think it would be utterly cruel to vilify people who are dependent on social grants and who really, in a country with the poverty that South Africa has been struggling with now for decades,
and the unemployment.
and the unemployment, of course. I just think that it's too easy. It's too easy a political, rhetorical argument to vilify these people when I don't think that is justified at all. Many of these people just have been so fundamentally let down by government policy, by government just snuffing out opportunities for these people to actually escape poverty. And I mean, in countries like the UK and the US, you have, constant conversations about the poverty trap. In South Africa, we don't have the poverty trap. We have the poverty hunt almost, where in the UK and the USA, there's this idea that you don't want to passively allow communities and large numbers of people to become dependent on state grants for survival. But in South Africa, it's almost as if government has taken that a step further. They have taken deliberate policy steps that have led to job losses, the inability of the country to create jobs and to really make a dent in poverty. So these people aren't, necessarily just trapped. They didn't stumble into poverty. They were put there and they've been kept there in many, many instances directly as a consequence of government policy. So that's the first thing you have to disentangle, is you can't just look down on these people and think, these are the people, the shirkers, and we are the workers, and they really, all they need to do is an honest day's work. Oftentimes, labor regulations, laws, policies just don't give them that opportunity. Then beyond that, you have this problem of nurturing generation after generation to become dependent on the state. The state kills the opportunities of these people to build their own lives, and then get them dependent generation after generation on this handout. That really just exacerbates the problem. When this whole thing started, the relationship between those in work and those on grants was, of course, weighted. There were more people in work than on grants, and I think we've reversed that position now. So just that as a basic layout for this. These people have been let down. Of course, there is something as individual agency, and you have to take control of your own destiny. But government has actively been making this difficult for these people. And now we sit in the situation where for a year, the government has had the opportunity to essentially roll out and make manifest the command economy that it ideologically aspires to. And it has just been one failure after another. And this painful failure with the grants, I mean, the state just not being able to give what they promised to people they'd be able to give is utterly appalling. That would be appalling were it not in a pandemic. But now we are in a pandemic. If we are seeing the collapse in terms of economic activities for many of these people. But then we also have this problem of people having to wait in queues for how many hours, how many days, exposed to all manner of things amidst a pandemic. So, I just think it's tragic.
So, John, I want to get any thoughts you have to add on to what Hermann said there. But I also want to bring up this other topic, and Hermann was just getting onto it there, which is that there was some reporting that suggested that we had lost one of the reasons our lockdown failed so badly, and that it was, despite being one of the harshest lockdowns in the world initially, really, seems to have driven our numbers up in a lot of ways, was because once the government locked down so heavily, many people were forced into queues. They had to stand there for grants. They had to stand there to get food, that kind of thing. And it looks like government really hasn't learned its lesson. This looks like it could have been avoided. Maybe funds could have been reallocated. Maybe different offices could have been opened up, or some sort of system put in place to prevent queues like this. It looks like we've learned nothing from our previous lockdown failure. What do you think about that, John?
I think that's a good point. And something I wanted to bring up also, following up on Hermann's opening remarks, is that in 2006, I attended the Hermann lecture of that year, given by Otto Graf Lambsdorff, a famous German liberal. And as long ago as that, the topic of his lecture was the risks in having extensive dependence on welfare, on social welfare. So Germany introduced social welfare systems very early, as early as the late 19th century. But even now in Germany, you can find families that have been dependent since 1918, since the First World War, on social welfare, and it's just one generation after the other, as Hermann was alluding to. And the question that arises out of this is, what is the plan? In other words, as Hermann says, people find themselves in dire straits at the moment. They're reliant on this income because there are no alternatives. The economy is weak. There are few jobs. Unemployment is high. So, what can people do? What choice do they have? But the upshot of it is, what is the plan? How do you change the situation? Because you don't want this to be a permanent situation. You want this to be a temporary situation. And that is where I think the government is actually due a bit of deserved vilification for not having a plan. At least none that I know of. There's wishful thinking about creating jobs and making the economy grow, but none of the reforms that are necessary to make that happen are being implemented. And that means that we're getting stuck with the situation. And it's through no fault of the grant recipients. As Hermann says, I just feel for those people, because, imagine being very, very poor, suffering from a disability, and then having to go to queue at night, to start in the queue at night, to go there to extend or renew your grant. I think is really very, very it's inhumane treatment of people. And that is where the government deserves vilification, also because it isn't able to organize the processes in a more efficient way.
Right.
The SASSA card is an electronic card. You've got ATMs throughout the country. You've got government offices throughout the country. You should be able to do biometric verification if you need to at many, many different places. And there's actually no need for people to suffer the indignity of having to sleep in the street in front of the offices for 2 nights with a disability, just in order to be able to apply for this pittance that they get from the government.
Right. Agree with that completely. All right, I think we should probably move on. Oh, one more thing I wanted to add was that, but just before you come in, Hermann, I think some observers have noted that the ANC, one of the loudest cheers they give in Parliament every year, I think it's either during the State of the Nation or during the budget, the number of grant recipients and the increase or decrease in that is read out. And one of the loudest cheers from the ANC always comes up when they mention how many people are now on grants. And on a surface level, that seems sort of reasonable, right? That's an achievement of their government. But if you think about it for a few minutes, it's really not great. Hermann, your final thoughts?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the real question that I think John raises is, what's the way out of this? We have millions of people dependent on a state that's running out of money, and this is why I have a lot of time for the ideological spectrums of difference along, in the liberal cluster, as it were. I have a lot of time for social democrats, and I have a lot of time for ordo liberals, and for libertarians, and the whole cluster of liberalism, because I can understand that you cannot, handbrake turn out of this without being quite cruel to many South Africans. So we do need a long-term plan that's implementable, but that crucially makes work pay. I think that is the real heart of what any social empowerment policy must be. It must allow unemployed people who are not living on the breadline, they are clinging to it, to find gainful employment. And that is why I am such a venomous opponent of something like the minimum wage, because the real minimum wage is R0 an hour, when the law makes it impossible for you as an unemployed person just to get that first foot on the income ladder. These aren't abstract, things far away. Something as simple as the minimum wage being scrapped, or at least being made voluntary, or an opt-in, opt-out sort of situation, can help these people actually achieve the dignity of work, the dignity that has been stripped of them first by racism and socialism, and now by corruption and socialism.
And it seems that the answer to this is, once again, like the answer is to so many of South Africa's problems, which is you just need to reduce the power of trade unions, stop hostility to business and reform the labor laws. And if you did that, it would go a long way to helping alleviate.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Anyway, let us move on to another story about, I guess, lack of resources. But this time, it's not so much people as it is money. It's not so much money as it is people. The Gauteng government has acknowledged yesterday that while it has doubled the hospital bed capacities in the province, this is anticipation of the growing COVID wave in Gauteng. It seems to be flattening a little bit. The early data seems to suggest that it's flattening in the Eastern Cape, Western Cape, and KZN, but that Gauteng is still on track for some of its worst case numbers. And yet the spokesperson Vuyo Mage for the Gauteng Health Department said that over 300 critical beds would be procured by the end of this month, that they had already doubled the number of beds in the province, but that they were very worried about having enough workers, healthcare workers, to actually assist and attend to people. It's no good putting people in beds if they never get seen by a doctor or nurse. They said that they are extending some nurses' contracts, but that they said, quote, "This area is one that is kind of worrying us," which is, I think, putting it slightly mildly. And I think this is a broader problem in South Africa, is brain drain. For a long time, we've been exporting healthcare professionals. John, what's your take on this, and what can we do to stop brain drain, or what drives it, at least? Let's start there.
Well, I have the feeling that healthcare workers, on the one hand, do or are attracted by greener pastures overseas, where pay may be higher, personal safety might be more assured than it is in South Africa. But I do also think that many healthcare workers are being actively pushed out of the country by a government that is unresponsive to their needs, and that threatens to introduce a national health insurance that would effectively remove a lot of the decision-making power from health professionals and make them completely subject to the state's whims and wishes. And so I really can't blame healthcare workers for leaving. At the same time, there are also quite a number of reports about healthcare workers who are either retired or have immigrated from other countries to South Africa, who are willing and able to lend their support to our efforts to fight the pandemic, but are not allowed to do so because the regulations stand in the way, and they can't get certified to be allowed to work in South Africa. And again, we can ask this question, I think, all day long: what is the plan? And there are some obvious things that the government could be doing, which is to call up on these resources that are available but unused at the moment, and to make it easier for doctors and nurses from other countries to come here, to get certified, and to work in our healthcare system and assist with what needs to be done. But there's another interesting aspect to this, which is that our supply of healthcare workers is also constrained by sickness, especially, of course, because of exposure to COVID. And it just casts a spotlight once again on the government's delay and tarrying in organizing vaccines, especially for healthcare workers. Because this is really something that should be pursued with the greatest forcefulness and determination, to make sure that healthcare workers are able to work and don't need to go into quarantine every few weeks because they've been exposed to a sick patient, or because they themselves have fallen sick. And again, here, a bit more thought put into the problem, I think, would go a long way to resolving it, despite the lack of resources that we face, of course, in all different sectors.
With that completely. And Hermann, the IRR actually raised some of these issues at the beginning of the year. Did we not? Tell us about what we said.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the day before the first lockdown, literally the day before, we published a policy response framework called Friends in Need: How South Africa Can Save Lives and Livelihoods. And it really was, the idea was to put pragmatic ideas on the table with track records locally or internationally of success. And one of the points, I think the lowest hanging fruits of this whole policy framework document that we sent to government and promoted to members of various governments, is to address exactly that regulatory hurdle that John was just referring to. I have immense faith in the decency of many South Africans. That's partly why I trust South Africans to, when faced with decisions, make decent and right ones. And we saw globally and here the willingness of retired medical personnel to take up arms, if I could be Churchillian for a moment, in this moment of crisis. And it's the same with foreign medical practitioners. We suggested to government so early on that fast track these options of getting retired medical practitioners back into practice, getting foreign approved and qualified medical practitioners on the front line. And a third point we actually made in this regard is look at your academic collection of medical students, see how you can roll out those with the necessary skills. I mean, they don't have to do the high level things, but if you're a second, third, fourth, whatever year medical student, you have an understanding of the medical system that you could have perhaps participated in something like this response to the pandemic in return for academic merit or acknowledgement. I mean, there were so many practical, pragmatic options for us to expand our capacity, and government just didn't take them up. I mean, one of my favorite niche policies that we suggested was to make it possible for people with death insurance to be able to access a limited percentage of what of the payment that would have come in the event of their death. They would have been able to the regulatory environment would have been adjusted so that they could access some of that payment that would have been paid to their family after their death, so as to have the middle class and the private sector and individuals bridge through their own savings the income gap established by this interruption of economic activity. The real tragedy is that none of these require genius to predict or to see coming. And it really reminds, I think it finds its most glaring manifestation in the vaccine issue. It's no surprise this vaccine came. That we are not ready for it is an absolute indictment of what the government has done, if one can point to regulating the sales of cooked chicken and open-toe sandals as, doing something about this vaccine. It's just tragic that almost every possible opportunity to anticipate and to come up with, limited but pragmatic solutions that could have amounted collectively to something, the government just, fumbled it in 99% of cases.
Right. As I saw also that even Derek Hanekom of the ANC was upset with NDZ's new, very precise defining of what exactly a beach is, because as we all know, that's the great threat to the health of the nation is who's on the beach right now.
I must say, listening to our Prime Minister, I think many South Africans come to their own definition of what a beach might be.
Ha 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 ha. Anyway, I think there's one more thing before I get a final word from you, John. I just want to touch on, which is there seems to be a kind of an arrogance in the way we often write regulations when it comes to especially foreign workers and foreign doctors. I had a friend who came to work in this country from overseas. She needed to, I think, submit police reports from every country she had ever worked in to make sure that she was a person of good standing, and just so many hurdles put in the way of stopping someone who, has skills that aren't available in the country coming here. And it's really the same for doctors and other professionals. John, any final thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, very quickly, because I know we need to move on to the next topic. One comment is on the theory of constraints, which you learn about at business school, which is that sometimes to produce a service, you need a certain number of elements in a certain combination. In this example, you might need, one hospital bed with one doctor and one nurse and one oxygen point to treat one patient. But what we can see is that the theory of constraints is not being applied here. So we're organizing beds, but we're forgetting about the healthcare workers. Or we've got, 1 million ventilators, but we don't have oxygen points. And this is a reflection, I think, of this centralizing mindset that the government has, which is that, we've got the big picture and we can plan everything, when in fact they can't. And we really should be encouraging the government to move away from centralization, allowing the private sector to get involved, to have different solutions being tested at the same time, rather than putting all our eggs in one basket.
Right. That's a very good point. Okay, let's move on in our last sort of 4 minutes here to another story about lack of resources to complete our sort of theme for the day. And this is the Amathole district municipality in the Eastern Cape, which is centered around East London, but also includes the municipalities around there. Says that it will need 411 million rand to survive and is intending to retrench employees. On Thursday last week, the municipality, which is one of 14 distressed local and district municipalities in the Eastern Cape, sent a memo to staff and other stakeholders warning them it won't be able to pay their salaries for 4 months. It said that this would also extend to councillors and local traditional leaders. They advised their employees to consult your creditors and advise them accordingly. They're looking to cut 33% of employees at middle management, where the cost of employment is too high. A spokesperson for the municipality said, the municipality has constantly highlighted that the root causes of it being technically bankrupt, among other things, is the high salary bill as a result of benefits and the unlawful recategorization of the municipality from Category 6 to Category 7 and standardization. With limited revenue-generating resource base, if the cost of employees is not curbed, the municipality will certainly not recover from its liquidity challenges. Sounds a little bit almost like the IRR bit there. John, in warning about financial catastrophe. Quickly, what's your thoughts on this?
The thing about economic reality is that you can only ignore it for so long. And then at some point it catches up with you and it bites you in the ass. And I think that's what's happening here. And it's happening across the public administration. I really feel sorry for the employees because just imagine receiving a letter telling you, I'm not going to pay you this month or next month or for the next 4 months. No, just make a plan. It's just unbelievable. I think they are really failing in their duty of care to their employees to make sure that they have the funds necessary to pay them, to pay the staff. And it's a disaster. And I think we'll see this repeated across all different categories of the state. Remember that the president said that there wasn't enough money to pay for vaccines. It's the most pressing thing that the nation has at the moment, at $10 per dose. So the alternatives are becoming less and less. We really need to figure out a way to get the economy growing, to increase the revenue base, because this is leading only one way, which is into a black hole of disaster and collapse.
Any successful political movement should be sure to make sure that it's out of power when the financial credit crunch happens. The ANC appears not to have learned this lesson because it's about to see the consequences of its own decisions. Hermann, 60 seconds. Your thoughts on this? Oh, he's just dropped off the call. Anyway.
You ran out of airtime.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah, what's interesting about this also to me is how it's actually affecting the people who are often held who are often considered by many people to be kind of almost out of the system, like councillors and chiefs. So it looks like it's really desperate, this municipality. Hermann, sorry, are you back?
Yes. I have something very, very quick to add in like 30 seconds. I'll fit it in. Two wonderful things happened in 2020, and that might be a surprise to hear, but two wonderful but small things happened in 2020. The one is in the northwest, in Koster, or as the municipality is called, the Gauteng Rivier local municipality. They were allowed by the Northwest High Court. No, I didn't. Yes, in Gauteng, to the community were allowed to take control of some of the infrastructural responsibilities of the municipality, and then of course Amazon and some of the larger commercial entities were seemingly granted some permission to generate their own power. Those two developments are very important cracks for freedom, that if we can drive the wedge, we can make real progress for freedom and the accountability of government.
Definitely. All right, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you want to support the IRR and the Daily Friend and all the work we do, please go to our website, irr.org.za, click the Join Us button, and sign up to become a friend of the Institute of Race Relations. Thanks very much for listening, and we will see you tomorrow for the week's final episode of the Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone.